This is BharatFM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत एफएम.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Hello, Namaste. Good morning to everyone. Thanks to Bharat FM and Bharat TV for giving us the opportunity. I am Vasudha Deshpande, a volunteer in Citizens Climate Lobby, Northern Kentucky chapter. With me, I have two guest speakers, Joe Robertson, who is the Executive Director of Citizens Climate International, and Donald Addu, who is a Program Director. Over to Donald.
All right, thanks, Vasudha. Welcome to another episode of Citizens Climate Lobby, Bharat TV and Bharat FM. My name is Donald Addu. I'm the Program Director for Citizens Climate Lobby, and we are delighted to have you with us today. Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to creating the political will for a stable climate. We empower individuals of all backgrounds to engage in democracy to pass meaningful climate legislation through Congress. We have chapters all over the United States, and we're in over 70 countries, so chances are that there's a chapter near you. Today, I have with me Joe Robertson, who is Citizens Climate International's Executive Director. Thank you for joining us today, Joe, and let us know how you're doing.
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Oh, good. Really appreciate you joining us. And I'd love to just kind of kick us off with a few questions. Citizens Climate Lobby started in Coronado, California with a focus on the U.S. Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about how the international work started and what led to the creation of Citizens Climate International?
Yeah, sure. The international work started because people started coming to Citizens Climate Lobby wanting to join the organization, and they were joining from Sweden and Germany and Australia and Bangladesh, and we didn't have an international program at the time. So the first thing that we had to do was start meeting with people on a regular basis and make sure we were providing training and empowerment to them so that they could organize locally, and that became our global strategy program. We started that in 2014. And over the next few years, that program expanded from, I think, 3 countries to 30 countries. It's grown so much now over the last 6-7 years that in January of this year, we decided to serve people in now 73 countries. We really needed to create a dedicated organization.
Wow, that's so cool. That's 73 countries. That's really amazing. How have you seen the conversation around carbon pricing evolve on the world stage, especially given how prominent you've been able to participate in the COP conferences across the world?
Sure. So, carbon pricing historically has been seen as one of two things in the international community, I would say. Either an efficient way to reduce emissions by changing whole economies, or a way to punish polluters. And so in the international negotiating process, it's generally been thought that the best place for carbon pricing to happen is for there to be a price on the major emitters, the historic industrial polluters. And the way that developing countries might participate would be that there would be some funding coming from offsets and credits that could pay for conservation. And that dynamic, that sort of split dynamic, has been very influential for most of the time that there's been climate negotiations when we talk about carbon pricing. But over the last few years, it's become increasingly evident that countries that don't have an effective carbon price in place are going to have a slower transition to a clean energy economy. What that means is that the people living in those countries are going to be dealing with pollution for longer. They're going to have fewer clean development opportunities. And the world as a whole will have a harder time actually decarbonizing, because we can't just decarbonize in one place and dump emissions somewhere else. We have to make sure that there are not emissions moving around the world. So the discussion has started to turn towards the question of what is the right way to put a price on carbon, disincentivize pollution, and spur green investment in developing countries, not only in the historic industrial polluting countries.
Makes a lot of sense. Excellent, excellent. The UN has set a goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Can you share a little bit about how they arrived at that number?
Yeah, so it's actually a really interesting story if you look into the history of it. Back in the 1980s, it was clear from the science already that unchecked global heating would lead to major climate disruption and catastrophic outcomes. The 1992 UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has a core mandate. That mandate is that the 196 countries agreed that they would work together to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. And there are several words there that matter: dangerous, human-caused, anthropogenic, and interference. So we don't want to disrupt the climate in a way that's too dangerous to handle. And that's now law. That's international law. We've agreed to do it, but we haven't gotten it done yet. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change looked at the question of whether 2 degrees Celsius was dangerous warming and found that it was. And in the years running up to the Paris Agreement, the thinking was that the world would have to keep warming to less than 2 degrees. The problem was that if, according to the science that we had, at 2 degrees Celsius of global average surface temperature increase across the world, several small island countries would disappear beneath rising seas. And those same rising seas would be causing incredible devastation in coastal regions. And so it became apparent that that might be far too much danger, far too costly, and that we needed a more ambitious goal. And so the year before the Paris Agreement, it was suggested that the IPCC report should include the idea that 1.5 degrees Celsius was a better target, pending investigation. That's way into the draft text of the Paris Agreement in Lima in 2014. And in Paris in 2015, during the first week of that 2-week negotiation that led to the Paris Agreement, there was a push initially from a few developing countries and then a few dozen. And then by the weekend, there were over 100 countries that had committed. And by Monday, all of the major industrial countries had committed that they would endorse 1.5 degrees in the text. And so what was agreed in Paris was that the world would have to keep global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius or work towards 1.5 degrees. And the Paris Agreement then included a mandate for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to investigate 1.5 degrees. They did, and in 2018, they published a report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and it is very clear that above that level, the amount of danger and cost and harm is really too great for us to bear, given the kind of world we want to live in.
Very interesting. Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Vasudha to ask some questions that are more specific to India itself. Vasudha?
Yeah. Hi, John. I just wanted to know, how long has CCI been active in India, and what are some of the actions these folks are taking?
Sure. Thank you, Vasudha. So in 2015, we started working with the first local chapters in India. Initially, there was one, and then very quickly 2 and 3 followed. And some of those initial volunteers were simply looking to get people together and talk about climate change. And some of them were looking to replicate the Citizens Climate Lobby model, to learn about carbon pricing and to talk to public officials. They mostly did that at the local level at the time. And over time, we've sort of evolved our strategy in India. In 2018, we had a new leader come in who wanted to create a much more national outreach effort. And we now have groups in 6 areas across India. And they're starting to organize more of a national campaign for enhancing national climate action, including carbon pricing that's good for people, that builds value for people in local communities. And one of the things that I think I should add is, part of what Citizens Climate International is focused on is the way that we get to participate in civics. And in much of the world, people don't have an immediate way to participate in civics that relates to climate change. So part of what we're trying to do is identify those opportunities for people to engage locally, engage with their community, engage with media, where they start to create that climate-related civic space, so that as the climate transformation goes forward, there can always be an element of public participation in that process.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So is the structure same as how we have here, or is it different?
Yeah, so our volunteers organize in local chapters. It's sometimes the case that there's a kind of super group or a kind of national team that helps to coordinate what everyone is going to do. And some of those people are working with multiple chapters. So it can be a little bit different in different places. In India, we're basically replicating that strategy of local chapters that come into the organization. You have a core group leader, initial volunteers, and they start to expand that group. And then they have a training a climate advocate training where they learn how we work. They learn about the 5 levers for building political will, engaging with communities, engaging with local leaders, engaging with media, engaging with government, and of course, building their chapter. And, I would say one of the things we've learned through this process as people try to adapt our model to different places is that the 5th lever, which is local chapter development, often needs to be first. That we have to always work on ways to empower people, to bring people into the organization, to welcome new people, to train and empower those that show up but stay quiet, etc.
So you're saying, like, how many chapters that are active in India right now?
There's 6 chapters that are active right now in India.
So it's the same website where they can just log in and register themselves?
Yeah, so if somebody goes to citizensclimatelobby.org and they click join, they register, and they're in India and they provide that information, they'll be signed up for CCL India. And if they go to citizensclimate.earth, which is the Citizens Climate International website, and they click join, they'll go to that same form and their information will go into the same place.
Okay. So do they have the monthly calling campaign and write to senators kind of thing there?
Yeah, so we are working with all of our volunteers around the world on how they can best communicate with people in the public sphere, in media, in government. And one of the things people can do is to write letters. They can also organize to have meetings with public officials. And there's an element of what our volunteers want to do, which is to try to shape the communication about climate online as well. But we always encourage people to the degree that they can to put their thoughts and feelings in their own words, based on their own experience, and communicate to the people in government that represent them.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And how many action teams do they have?
So we don't have specific different action teams in CCL India, but we are in the process actually of developing a strategy where we help, where part of the training and empowerment that we give to group leaders is essentially a way of developing those teams or developing sort of secondary actions or parallel actions to our carbon pricing advocacy, so that when they are working in a community where something else is the most immediate problem, or when they're engaging with someone in government who doesn't work on that, would do something else if they could, they can have that conversation. And in some places there is, we don't have a formal action team for it, but in some places the focus is on water, for instance, access to clean water, and the ways in which that relates to climate and other policies that have an environmental impact.
Yeah, thank you. So you are saying, is it 2 years, since 2 years they have started the CCI there, or how's?
So Citizens Climate Lobby started training volunteers in India in 2015. And then there was a bit of a changeover. Some of the people who were working there at the time kind of went away, and we started redeveloping. It's 2018 that our current leadership really came in and started working to grow the organization. And so little by little, we've gotten to now six chapters.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah, thank you so much. Over to Don. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Vasudha. I'd like to take a step back and talk a little bit more about Paris. I've heard criticism in the United States around the Paris goals, as in that there's no enforcement mechanism to make countries meet that 1.5 degree Celsius goal. How do you see the Paris framework playing out across the world, and do you believe that it's made a difference in terms of global action on climate?
So yes, the first thing I would say is it has definitely made a difference in terms of global action. I would also say that as a global community, we have not actually started to reverse climate change yet. We have not started to drive emissions globally down at the rate we need to. But the amount of awareness, the amount of policy getting into place, the amount of investment that's starting to shift, all of those things are happening. And I think over the last couple of years, what's become evident to people who, as recently as 2015, when Paris was agreed, would have resisted that transformation, there's now certainty that it will happen. And so I believe a lot of that has come because there's global agreement that we must act on the mandate of the 1992 treaty. I'd also say that it's important to remember the Paris Agreement is an implementation agreement for a global treaty. And that global treaty requires that we end climate change, basically. So all nations are already legally bound to work on that. The Paris Agreement created a process where up to the historic hinders to do that, everybody has a role to play. And it's set up so that countries can be rewarded essentially for doing more. It's set up as a race to the top, right? So the better you behave, the more power and influence you should gain on the world stage, diplomatically, geopolitically, but also economically. And of course, there are real opportunities there, whether it's manufacturing for the green economy or climate smart agricultural exports. The question is not whether the Paris Agreement has an enforcement mechanism or whether there's some sort of global climate police. The question is what the enforcement looks like. And so, the European Union is exploring carbon border adjustments. They will implement that policy. And what that means is that trading with the European Union will require you to compete to be better on climate. Otherwise, other trading partners will have an edge over you. This is a way to build on the Paris Agreement and to build on that mandate that we all work together to end climate change. So we're just at the start, I think, of that race to the top. Countries are just starting to now upgrade their initial promises. Some of them have acted significantly. I think what we have to pay attention to right now is what are the moving pieces each country puts in place to make sure they're going to be part of that climate smart future. So for instance, an example from the US could put a price on carbon. The US could put a clean energy standard in place. There's a difference between a clean energy standard, clean electricity standard in an economy where all transport is electric and in an economy where no transport is electric, right? If you have 100% clean energy standard and all transport is electric, now you're decarbonizing both transport and electricity at the same time. So that one policy combined with that context makes a significant difference. What happens in the intergovernmental negotiations is the countries try to figure out who's going to go first, who's going to do more, where funding might come from. But non-party stakeholders, meaning companies, subnational jurisdictions, experts, non-governmental organizations, they're all going to weigh in also. They're going to say, here's what we see happening. The science says you're emitting too much. Now that country has to respond to that. Their trading partners are going to say, well, we can't have you messing up our climate performance. We were on a good track. Now we're trading with you and your emissions are ruining our performance. We want to correct that. So we'll either work with you to correct it or we're going to go somewhere else. And that's where the pressure comes from. The pressure comes from the fact that we're really in a race against time. And it may not be this year, but we're very close to the moment where it will be impossible to build or to hold geopolitical clout if you're not moving forward on climate.
I love that. That's a great optimism too. I have to say, I really like the idea of a global climate police, running around arresting polluters. I think that's pretty awesome. So, Joe, what are you planning to be in Glasgow for the COP26 conference this fall?
I am planning to be there. We will have a team there. If everything if everything goes forward, if it's COVID safe, if people can participate, we plan to be there. Yes.
Excellent. And what would you say is if you could pick a goal going into Glasgow, what would be your goal to achieve at that conference?
Well, so, I think we set our goals on different levels, right? We have our own goal for our team. And then we have the goals that we want to see in terms of what our team can do in that environment. And then there are the things we want to see the whole COP, the whole, negotiation process achieve. For us, we want to have a delegation that is as big as last time, that is as well prepared and organized as last time, and where we're able to work on not only some of the key issues that we work on, like climate income or carbon fee and dividend, which is not something that will be legislated in that conference, but it is something that fits into the enhancement of national climate ambition. But also other areas. We want to work on the summit to sea agenda, basically, meaning, glaciers, watersheds, ecosystems, the health and resilience of the ocean. Those things are interconnected, and it's still new to a lot of people in the process to talk about the summit to sea landscape of outcomes as part of what we're doing when we try to solve climate change. So we want to be able to engage intelligently on that. And then in terms of what we want to see our team do in that environment, we will be looking for ways to help enrich the discussions around Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is how you track the movement of emissions from country to country. Is there an emissions trading system? Is there clear transparency and accountability? Can you eliminate so-called double counting? And also Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. So Section 8 of Article 6, which talks about non-market approaches, meaning things that don't necessarily work through a trading system, but that do change the overall economic landscape to favor emissions reductions. We have ways that we want to talk to people about doing that. And we also want to talk to people in government about how we can improve people's livelihoods. It's possible for farmers to make a better living from climate smart agricultural practices. We want to be engaged in those spaces. And then, for the COP as a whole, I think it's important that the world fully commit to zeroing out emissions. It's good to say net zero. And if net zero is real, if it's solid, then that's real and solid and we'll be on track, right? It means that there won't be any new total emissions in the atmosphere. We won't be making it worse. But we really have to commit to zeroing out emissions, to not having emissions coming from our industrial sector, our transport sector, our electricity sector. And that's something that countries can agree to. They can agree to follow science-based targets, which means you've got to get past 50% emissions reductions by 2030. It might just be a resolution to go in that direction. But I think if the substance of the process this year makes a firm commitment that that's where the world is headed. We've already seen earlier this year $98 trillion through the race to zero, just through 2 investor networks to move to net zero. All the money in the world is at stake. All the money in the world will chase those goals. So I think it's important that the COP reach something that ambitious and that there be some concrete ways to talk about how that affects people's everyday lives.
I love it. That's so cool. Awesome. Well, one last question for you, Joe, before we let you go. How can folks outside the United States get involved with Citizens Climate International?
So the easiest way is to just go to citizensclimate.earth. That'll take you to the front page of our website, and you can just right there on the front page, join. Just sign up and get involved. You'll hear from us in response, and we'll take you through a process of getting to know the organization, getting to know what you can do locally, introducing you to people who might already be working in your community, depending on where you are. And, you know, I think it's important to say, for those who aren't familiar with Citizens Climate, how we work. Our goal is to provide people with essentially free ongoing education and empowerment so that they can be persistently engaged in making climate policy better, stronger, and more effective, and that they can do that as part of a team. So they're never on their own doing it. They always know that others elsewhere are working with them. And so that's what we're inviting people to do if they come and join.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know I always enjoy hearing your insights on the global stage. It's always fascinating. And thank you all for watching, for both turning into BharatFM and Bharat TV. We will be hosting our 5th episode in 2 weeks after this. So again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you both for being here today.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Don.
Joe,
Thank
for
you,
your
Vasudha.
time.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Bye.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.